On his 18th birthday, a boy was kicked out with nothing but the key to a worthless, abandoned sawmill. What he discovered inside wouldn't just change his life, it would rewrite his past. If you've ever been made to feel worthless or been told that your only inheritance is a burden, then this story is for you. Stick around and maybe do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who've had to find their own way. The cold was the first thing I remember. Not the deep, biting cold of a winter storm, but the thin, indifferent cold of an early March morning on a covered porch. It was the kind of cold that seeps through a thin hoodie, a cold that doesn't care about you at all. My stepmother, Brenda, stood in the doorway of the house I'd grown up in, her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at me, but at something over my shoulder, as if I were already gone. The door was held open just enough for her body to fill the space, a clear and final barrier. "The lawyer called," she said, her voice as flat as the gray sky. "Everything's settled. You're legally an adult now." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? We'd been counting down to this day for a full year, ever since my dad died. For me, it was a day of dread. For her, it was closing day on a long, inconvenient transaction. On the top step of the porch sat a single cardboard box. It wasn't large. It contained my laptop, a few books, a shoebox of old photos, and the clothes that she hadn't already thrown out. 2 years of high school, a childhood of memories, all condensed into a cube of corrugated brown paper. "Here," she said, finally looking at me. She held out a small, manila envelope. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured, a shade of deep red that looked like dried blood against the pale paper. I took it. My fingers felt clumsy and numb. "That's your inheritance." "Don't say I never gave you anything." There was no warmth in her words, only a sharp, metallic edge of triumph. She had won. The house, my dad's pension, the life he had built. It was all hers now. I was the last loose end, and she was snipping the thread. I looked down at the envelope. It was thin. Through the paper, I could feel the rigid shape of a single, old-fashioned key and a folded sheaf of documents. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She actually laughed, a short, ugly bark. "It's your father's old sawmill, up in Northwood. A collapsed, rotten heap of garbage that's been condemned for a decade. The taxes on it are worth more than the land. It's your problem now." She stepped back, her hand already moving the door. "Good luck, Leo. You're going to need it." And then the door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. I stood there on the porch, the cold air clinging to my skin, the box at my feet, and the envelope in my hand. I was 18 years old. I was an orphan, and I was homeless. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the closed door, and then out at the empty street. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing at all. It was like a circuit inside me had finally overloaded and gone dark. All I could think was that she was wrong about one thing. It wasn't a problem. It was the only thing I had left. It was a destination. And for someone with nowhere to go, any destination at all feels a little like hope. I picked up the box. It was lighter than it should have been. I took a breath, the cold air burning my lungs, and I walked away from the only home I had ever known, without once looking back. The journey I was about to take, the things I was about to find, would piece back together not only my future, but the father I thought I had lost forever. The lawyer's office was exactly as I remembered it from the reading of the will a year ago. Dark wood, the smell of old paper and leather, and an air of quiet, expensive solemnity. Mr. Davies sat behind his enormous desk, his hands steepled. He was a man who seemed to be composed entirely of soft, rounded edges. A round face, a round belly, even his voice was soft and round. He was the opposite of Brenda's sharp angles. He had been my father's lawyer for 20 years, and he looked at me with an expression of weary pity. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle, "I'm sorry it's come to this. Brenda, your stepmother, was within her legal rights to ask you to vacate the premises upon your 18th birthday. The house was left to her in your father's will." "I know," I said, looking at the polished surface of his desk. I didn't want his pity. I just wanted to understand. I placed the manila envelope on the desk between us. "She gave me this." She said it was the Sawmill. He sighed, a long, slow exhalation of air, and picked up the envelope. He slid out the contents with practiced fingers. A set of folded, official-looking documents and a single, heavy iron key, its head shaped like a stylized pine tree. "Yes, the Northwood Mill. It was your father's first business, you know, before he met Brenda, before he moved to the city." He pushed the papers towards me. "This is the deed. It's in your name now. The transfer was automatic, as stipulated in the trust your father set up for you." A trust? Brenda had always said my dad left me nothing. A trust? What trust? Mr. Davies gave me a sad smile. "A very small one, I'm afraid. Your father established it years ago, with the mill as its only asset. He funded it with just enough to cover the property taxes for a few years after his passing. That money has now run out. The final payment was made last month. From this point forward, the tax liability is yours." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And there are several years of back taxes owing." Of course there were. It was the perfect parting gift from Brenda. Not just a worthless property, but a debt attached to it. A weight designed to pull me under before I even learned to swim. "So she was right," I muttered, looking at the rusted key. "It's a worthless pile of junk." "From a real estate perspective," Mr. Davies said carefully, choosing his words like a man walking through a minefield, "the property has significant liabilities. It's in a state of disrepair. The machinery is obsolete. The town council officially condemned the main building 5 years ago after a section of the roof collapsed in a snowstorm. To be blunt, Leo, the cost to make it safe, let alone operational, would be astronomical. And now, the back taxes—" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "So what do I do?" I asked. The numbness was starting to wear off, replaced by a cold, creeping panic. "Just let the county take it?" "That is certainly an option," he conceded. "You could sign it over, walk away. Or you could try to sell the land. A developer, Northridge Holdings, has made an offer in the past." He slid another piece of paper from a folder. It was a letter with a fancy logo. "They offered $10,000 for the parcel last year. An insulting price, frankly, given that it's waterfront property, but considering the demolition costs and the tax burden, it might be your most logical move. The offer is likely still on the table. It would give you a small amount of cash to start over with." $10,000. It sounded like a fortune and nothing at all at the same time. Enough for a deposit on a cheap apartment, maybe. A few months of life. Then what? I thought of Brenda in that big house with my dad's money, and a wave of bitterness washed over me. Selling felt like letting her win completely. It felt like agreeing with her that my father's legacy was nothing but a $10,000 pile of junk. Why did he keep it? I asked, the question surprising me as it came out. If it was so worthless, why did my dad hold on to it for all these years? Why put it in a trust for me? Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Your father was sentimental about that place. He and your grandfather built it together. After your grandfather passed, your dad tried to make a go of it, but the logging industry was changing. He couldn't compete with the big conglomerates. He shut it down when you were just a baby, moved to the city to take that sales job. But he never wanted to let the mill go. He always said it was more than just land and wood. He said it was history. His history. Your history. History. The word hung in the air. My history was a cardboard box and a rusted key. I looked at the key again, the intricate pine tree design seeming to mock me. I have to go see it, I said, the decision forming with a strange, sudden clarity. Mr. Davies looked surprised. Leo, I'm not sure that's wise. The place is not safe. And what will you do when you get there? There's nothing for you in Northwood. There's nothing for me here either, I replied, my voice harder than I intended. I stood up, scooping the deed and the key back into the envelope. The panic was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was there too, a flicker of defiance. My dad hadn't kept a pile of junk. He had kept a piece of his history, our history. And Brenda, with all her money and her victory, couldn't touch that. She could kick me out of his house, but she couldn't take this. I didn't know what I would find at the Northwood Mill. Maybe it really was just a ruin. Maybe I'd get there, take one look, and call the developer myself. But I had to see it. I had to stand in the one place on earth that was still mine. Thank you for your time, Mr. Davies, I said, turning toward the door. Leo, wait, he called after me. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. Your father was a good man, a very good man. Don't ever forget that. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out his wallet. He took out $300 bills and held them out to me. For the bus ticket and a decent meal. Don't argue. Your father would have wanted it. I hesitated, shame and gratitude warring inside me. I took the money. Thank you, I mumbled. And then I was out the door, the bell chiming softly behind me, leaving the world of leather and law behind for a world of rust and uncertainty. The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey out of the life I knew. I sat with my face pressed against the cool glass of the window, my box on the seat beside me, watching the city dissolve. The familiar grid of streets gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to highways flanked by strip malls and gas stations. Gradually, the concrete and steel landscape softened into rolling farmland, then thickened into dense, dark forests. The sky was a uniform sheet of gray, and a light, persistent drizzle began to fall, streaking the dirt on the window. Each mile put more distance between me and the locked door of my old home, between me and Brenda's smug victory. With each mile, the knot of panic in my stomach loosened just a little, replaced by a hollow, floating emptiness. I was untethered, a ghost drifting towards another ghost, the Sawmill. I had a vague memory of my dad talking about Northwood. He described the smell of pine after it rained, the sound of the river in the spring when the ice broke up. He never spoke of it with sadness, but with a kind of quiet reverence, the way someone might speak of a person they once loved. He'd told me stories of working there with my grandfather, of learning to grade lumber, of the time he'd almost lost a finger to the big blade of the head saw. To him, it wasn't a failure. It was a foundation. I wondered what he would think of me now, running toward it with nowhere else to go. The bus wheezed into Northwood just as dusk was settling, painting the wet streets in shades of deep blue and purple. The town was small, smaller than I'd imagined. A single main street with a row of two-story brick buildings. a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a sleepy-looking market, and a post office. A few pickup trucks were parked at slanted angles along the curb. The air that hit me when the bus doors opened was shockingly clean and cold, thick with the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and pine. It was the smell my dad had described. I shouldered my backpack, which held my laptop and a change of clothes, grabbed my box, and stepped off the bus. It pulled away with a hydraulic sigh, leaving me alone under the hum of a single streetlight. The town was quiet. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me from behind the drawn curtains of the houses lining the street. The stranger. The outsider. My first stop was the general market. A bell tinkled above the door as I entered. The inside was warm and smelled of coffee and cardboard. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. "Help you with something?" she asked, her eyes taking in my city clothes and the box in my arms. "I'm looking for the old Sawmill," I said. "The one that used to belong to the Miller family." Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, you must be John's boy. Leo, is it?" I was stunned. "Yeah, how did you know?" She smiled. "Your dad used to call here, you know, every few months. Would talk to my husband, Frank, ask how the town was doing, if the old mill was still standing. He always said you'd be coming up to see it one day. I'm Mary. It's a shame about your father. He was a good man." The unexpected kindness felt like a physical blow. I had to swallow hard against the lump forming in my throat. "Thank you." "The mill's about a mile past the edge of town," she said, pointing out the window. "Just follow this road. You can't miss it. Big old thing down by the river. Hasn't been anyone out there in years, though. Be careful, son. The place is rough." "I will," I promised. "Thank you, Mary." I bought a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix, the most practical-looking food I could find. The $300 from Mr. Davies felt like a lifeline. As I walked out, Mary called after me, "The diner's open till 9 if you get hungry. Martha makes a mean pot roast." I gave her a wave and started walking. The pavement of Main Street soon turned to gravel, and the streetlights disappeared. The road was flanked by towering pine trees that formed a dark canopy overhead. The drizzle had stopped, but the air was heavy with moisture. The only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel and the distant rush of water, the river, my dad's river. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a massive, skeletal shape loomed against the darkening sky. The Northwood Mill. It was bigger than I had imagined, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings with a high, peaked roof over the main section. The wood of the walls was weathered to a silvery gray, and several sections were dark with rot and moss. The roof over one of the side buildings had indeed collapsed, leaving a gaping black hole. A chain-link fence, rusted and sagging, surrounded the entire property. A large sign, so faded it was barely legible, hung crookedly from the gate. It read, "Miller and Son Lumber. My history." I walked up to the gate. It was secured with a thick, rusty chain and a heavy padlock. I fumbled in my pocket for the envelope, my fingers stiff with cold. I pulled out the iron key. It looked ancient, like something from a fairy tale. I tried it in the padlock. It was stiff, and for a terrifying second, I thought it wouldn't work. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight. There was a loud, grating screech of metal on metal, and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock sprang open. I pushed the heavy gate inward. It groaned in protest, its hinges screaming after years of silence. I stepped through, onto the property that was now mine. The air inside the fence felt different, still, heavy, and thick with the ghosts of the past. I was standing on a wide, muddy track where logging trucks must have once rolled in and out. Ahead of me, the main mill building stood like a silent, sleeping giant. Its windows were dark, like vacant eyes. I walked toward the main entrance, a set of huge, sliding wooden doors. To the side was a smaller, man-sized door. I tried the handle. Locked. I slid the pine tree key into the lock. This one turned smoothly. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It swung inward into absolute blackness. A wave of air washed over me, cool and musty, carrying the rich, earthy scent of old wood, machine oil, and time itself. I stood there on the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once. I had no plan, no food, no place to sleep. But I was here. I was home. Or at least, I was at the beginning of whatever home was supposed to mean. I took one more step, crossing from the world outside into the silent, waiting heart of the mill. The darkness inside was total. As my eyes adjusted, faint gray light from the open door behind me began to sketch the outlines of a colossal space. The air was thick with the ghosts of a million sounds, the scream of saws, the rumble of conveyors, the shouts of men, all now compressed into a profound, echoing silence. I pulled out my phone and switched on its flashlight. The beam cut a sharp, white cone through the gloom, illuminating a universe of dust. Motes swirled and danced in the light like tiny stars. I was standing on a wooden floor, thick with a blanket of sawdust and dirt. The space was cavernous, the ceiling soaring 2 or 3 stories above me, crisscrossed with massive wooden beams and a tangle of defunct wiring and conveyor belts. The flashlight beam crawled across the floor and landed on the first machine. It was a huge, iron beast with a circular blade at least 5 feet in diameter, frozen in place, its teeth coated in a fine layer of rust. The head saw. The one my dad had told me about. It looked like a sleeping dinosaur. I swept the light around the room. Everywhere I looked, there were more machines, silent and immense. Conveyor belts with rotting rubber surfaces snaked across the floor. A giant metal carriage sat on a set of rails, designed to carry whole logs into the saw's path. Farther back, there were planers, edgers, and trimmers, all silent, all draped in cobwebs that hung like funeral shrouds. It was a mechanical graveyard. Brenda was right. It was a pile of junk. But it was a magnificent pile of junk. It had a strange, solemn beauty to it. This was a place where trees had been transformed, where raw nature had been shaped by human hands and iron will. My grandfather's hands, my father's hands. I walked deeper into the mill, my footsteps the only sound, muffled by the sawdust. I ran my hand along the cold, cast-iron frame of a debarking machine. The metal was pitted and rough. I could almost feel the vibration it must have once made, the raw power that had coursed through it. I felt like an archaeologist discovering a lost temple. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was preserved, a perfect time capsule of a dead industry. To the right of the main floor, a short set of wooden stairs led up to a small, enclosed room built on a platform overlooking the saw floor. The foreman's office. I climbed the stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and shone my light inside. It was a small, square room with a large window looking out over the silent machinery. Inside was a simple wooden desk, a single wooden chair, and a bank of old filing cabinets against one wall. Everything was coated in the same thick layer of dust. A calendar was still hanging on the wall, the pages yellowed and curled. The picture was of a mountain lake, and the month was July, 1999. The year my dad shut the place down. It was like he'd walked out one day and never come back. I walked over to the desk. On its surface were a few scattered, rust-stained paper clips, a dried-up pen, and a coffee mug with the faded logo of a local hardware store. I sat down in the chair, It creaked loudly, but held my weight. I looked out the window, at the dark shapes of the saws and conveyors below. This is where my dad would have sat. He would have looked out this window and seen a bustling, noisy world of work and purpose. Now I looked out and saw only silence and decay. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so heavy it felt like I was sinking through the floor. What was I doing here? This wasn't a history, it was a tomb. I pulled open the top drawer of the desk. It was empty, save for a few desiccated mouse droppings. The second drawer was the same. I tried the bottom drawer on the right side. It was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I shone my light on it. It had a small, simple lock, the kind you could probably pick with a paperclip. I didn't have a paperclip, but I did have the iron key. The head of it was too thick, but the other end was slender. I wedged it into the keyhole and wiggled it. Nothing. Frustration began to bubble up inside me. I yanked on the drawer handle with all my strength. There was a sharp crack of splintering wood, and the drawer pulled free, the broken lock mechanism clattering to the floor. My heart was pounding. I shone my light inside. For a moment, I thought it was empty too. But then my beam caught the dull gleam of dark green metal in the back corner. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a small, heavy, military-style ammunition box. The kind of thing you could buy at an army surplus store. It was cold to the touch and sealed with 2 latches. I lifted it onto the desk. It wasn't locked. My fingers trembled as I flipped the latches open. They made a loud snapping sound in the quiet room. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no treasure. There was something far more valuable. On top lay a stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes, bound together with a faded rubber band. They were sealed. On the very top envelope, in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting, were 2 words. For Leo. Underneath the letters was a small, clunky, old-fashioned cassette player, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies. A cassette tape was already inside it. A small, handwritten label on the tape read, "Play me first." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a tomb, it was a message. A time capsule meant for me, and only me. The mill wasn't just a place he'd left behind. It was a place he had left for me. Everything was about to change. I sat there in the dusty foreman's office, the heavy metal box open on the desk in front of me, the cone of my phone's flashlight illuminating the scene like a spotlight in a play. My hands were shaking. For Leo. The word seemed to pulse in the dim light. My father, who had been gone for a year, was suddenly, impossibly, right here in this room with me. His handwriting, his voice waiting on a magnetic tape, his last words sealed in a stack of envelopes. My first instinct was to tear into the letters, to consume every word he'd left for me. But the cassette tape was there for a reason. Play me first. It was a direct order from the past. I picked up the small plastic player. It felt impossibly light and cheap, a toy from another era. I checked the side. The batteries were still inside, miraculously uncorroded. I pressed the eject button. The door popped open with a lazy mechanical sigh. The tape inside looked perfect. I closed the door, took another shaky breath, and pressed the play button. For a second, there was only the soft hiss of the tape turning. And then, his voice. Leo? The sound hit me like a physical force. It wasn't a memory of his voice. It was his actual voice, low and warm and a little rough around the edges, filling the tiny office. It was so real, so present, that I instinctively looked up, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway. A choked sob escaped my lips, the first real sound of grief I had made in a year. I clamped my hand over my mouth, my body shaking with the force of it. Leo, his voice said again, closer this time, as if he'd leaned into the microphone. If you're hearing this, it means a few things. It means you're 18. It means I'm gone. And it means you found this box. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry for all of it. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of him taking a breath. I know you're probably scared. And angry. Angry at me. Angry at everyone. You have every right to be. I know Brenda probably kicked you out with nothing but the key to this place. I know she probably told you it was worthless. In a way, she's right. As a mill, it's dead. But as something else, as a guardian, it's the most valuable thing I could leave you. A guardian? What did that mean? I leaned closer to the little speaker, straining to hear every word over the frantic pounding of my own heart. There are things you don't know, he continued, his voice dropping lower. Things I couldn't tell you while I was alive. It has to do with Brenda and her family. Her brother, specifically. They're not good people, Leo. They're involved in things, dangerous things. When I got sick, I knew I was running out of time. I knew what they would do once I was gone. They would take everything. And they would try to get rid of you, the one loose end they couldn't control. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. I cried for the year of cold silence from Brenda. I cried for the lonely nights in that house that no longer felt like a home. I cried for my dad, who had been carrying this terrible weight alone. I couldn't protect you with money, he said, his voice thick with regret. They would have found a way to take it. The law, lawyers, they can twist things. So I had to do something different. I had to leave you a fortress. This old place. Nobody wants it. It's a ruin. An eyesore. I made sure of that. I let it fall apart. I let the taxes pile up. I made it look like the last thing on earth anyone would ever fight for. A perfect hiding place. I looked around the dark, dusty office. A hiding place, not a tomb. The letters in the box will explain more, he said. Read them in order. But there's something you need to find first. Something I couldn't risk putting in here. It's the real reason I'm doing this. It's your choice, Leo. Your weapon, or your fresh start. Or maybe both. In the main mill, go to the old floor planer. The big iron one near the west wall. Look underneath it. The foundation is newer there. I poured it myself a few years back. You'll know what to do. Be careful, son. Trust your gut. And trust Mr. Davies. He doesn't know everything, but he's a good man. And Leo, I love you. I've always been so proud of you. Don't you ever forget that. The tape hissed for a few more seconds, and then there was a click as it reached its end. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, deeper than before. I sat there, shaking, my face wet with tears, the echo of my father's voice still ringing in my ears. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't left me with a pile of junk out of sentimentality. He had been protecting me. This whole elaborate, heartbreaking act of decay and neglect, it was a shield. An act of love more powerful than any inheritance of stocks or bonds. He had left me a puzzle, a mission, and a choice. The grief was still there, a vast, hollow ache in my chest. But now, it was joined by something else. A fierce, burning resolve. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I wasn't the boy who got kicked out. I was the son of John Miller. And I had a job to do. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my hoodie, stood up, and looked at the stack of letters. Not yet. First, the planer. I picked up my phone, its battery now worryingly low, and walked out of the office, back into the cavernous darkness of the mill, my small beam of light cutting a determined path toward the west wall. The game had changed. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means a lot. This part, right here, was the moment everything pivoted for me. Have you ever had a moment like that? A message from the past, a sudden revelation that changes your entire perspective on your own life. It can be a painful, confusing experience, but it can also be the beginning of finding your own strength. If you've been through something similar, I'd be honored if you shared a little bit about it in the comments below. You don't have to give details, just let us know that you get it. This community is for all of us who have had to find our way through the dark. Now, let's get back to the story. I had a foundation to find. My phone's flashlight beam, now weaker and more yellow as the battery drained, bounced off the hulking shapes of the machinery as I made my way across the main floor. The air was getting colder as the night deepened, and my breath plumed in the beam of light. I found the planer against the far west wall. It was an absolute monster of a machine, a long, low table of cast iron, wider than I was tall, with a huge cutting assembly hooded in sheet metal. It was designed to smooth rough-sawn boards, and it looked like it could plane a man down to his bones without even noticing. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Look underneath it." I got down on my hands and knees on the filthy floor. The space under the planer was tight, no more than 2 feet high, crisscrossed with drive shafts and grease-caked gears. It smelled strongly of oil and rust. I took a breath and crawled into the darkness, dragging my phone with me. The beam swept across the concrete floor beneath the machine. Most of it was old, dark gray concrete, stained and cracked with age. But just as my dad had said, in the very center, there was a rectangular section that was different. It was a lighter shade of gray, the surface smoother, less weathered. It was about 3 feet by 4 feet, a patch, a slab he had poured himself. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I pushed against it with my hands. It was solid rock. Of course it was. I hadn't expected a trapdoor with a convenient handle. I crawled back out from under the machine, my clothes now filthy with grease and sawdust, and stood up, brushing myself off. I needed tools. A sledgehammer, a pry bar, something to break through the concrete. And I needed light. My phone was down to 15%. There was only one thing to do. I had to go back to town. Leaving the mill felt different this time. I wasn't abandoning it. I was on a mission for it. I pulled the heavy door shut, the sound echoing in the stillness, and locked it with the pine tree key. I felt a new sense of ownership, of purpose. This wasn't just a building, it was a vault, and I was its keeper. The walk back to town was dark and unnerving. The woods felt deeper, the shadows longer. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. My dad's warning about Brenda's family echoed in my mind. Dangerous people. Were they watching me? Did they know I was here? Paranoia pricked at the back of my neck, and I walked faster, my keys clutched in my fist. I emerged back onto the relative brightness of Main Street, like a diver surfacing for air. The diner was still lit, a warm, welcoming glow in the darkness. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten a real meal all day. But food could wait. I needed tools. The hardware store was dark, but a single light was on in an apartment above it. A sign in the window said open till 8, but a smaller, handwritten sign taped below it said, "If you really need something, ring the bell." I hesitated for a moment, then pressed the button. A loud, buzzing sound erupted from a speaker next to the door. After a minute, a light flicked on inside the store, and an elderly man with a shock of white hair and a plaid bathrobe appeared at the glass door, peering out at me. He unlocked it and opened it a crack. "A bit late for shopping, ain't it?" he grumbled, though his eyes weren't unkind. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," I said, my words coming out in a rush. "I just got into town. I'm staying out at the old Miller place, and I need to do some repairs. I need a sledgehammer and a pry bar." The man's eyebrows shot up. The old mill? You're John Miller's boy, then. He opened the door wider. Heard you were coming. Come on in. Name's Frank. My wife Mary called me from the market. The whole town knew. Of course they did. I stepped inside. The store smelled of metal, fertilizer, and fresh-cut wood. Frank shuffled behind the counter and turned on a few more lights. So you gonna do some repairs on that old beast, are ya? He asked, looking me up and down. Gonna need more than a hammer, son. You'll need a miracle. Just starting small, I said, not wanting to explain that I was about to perform amateur demolition on the foundation. He led me to the back of the store, to a row of heavy tools. He picked out a sturdy-looking 4-pound sledgehammer and a long steel crowbar. These should do you, he said. You got a place to stay out there? It gets cold as a witch's heart in that old barn at night. I'll be okay, I said, though I had no idea if that was true. You're your father's son, all right, he grunted, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. Stubborn. He never knew when to quit, either. He carried the tools to the counter. That'll be $64.50. I pulled out one of the $100 bills Mr. Davies had given me. Frank made change from an old metal cash box. You be careful out there, you hear? He said, handing me the receipt. There's been some fancy-looking SUVs snooping around that property the last few months. Folks from downstate. The kind that wear suits and look like they've never seen a tree before. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Northridge Holdings. Brenda's brother. They were already circling. I'll be careful, I said, my voice tight. I thanked him and left, the heavy tools feeling both like a burden and a comfort in my hands. The walk back to the mill was even more tense. Every pair of headlights that appeared in the distance made me duck into the trees, my heart pounding until the car passed. Were they looking for me? By the time I reached the gate, my phone was dead. I was plunged into absolute darkness, armed with a hammer and a crowbar, my only light the sliver of a moon that occasionally broke through the clouds. I unlocked the door to the mill and stepped back inside. The darkness was even more oppressive now, but I didn't care. I knew my way. I felt my way across the floor, my hands brushing against the cold iron of the silent machines, until I was back at the planer. I knelt down, the tools clanking on the concrete beside me. I couldn't see anything. I had to do this by feel. I crawled back under the machine, my hands finding the edges of the newer, smoother slab of concrete. This was it. I wriggled back out, grabbed the sledgehammer, and crawled back in, dragging it behind me. There was no room to swing it properly. I had to hoist it up and bring it down in a short, brutal arc. The first blow was clumsy, striking the metal frame of the planer with a deafening clang that echoed through the entire mill. My ears rang. I repositioned myself, took a breath, and swung again. This time, it hit the concrete with a dull, solid thud. I hit it again, and again, a rhythm of desperation. Hoist, swing, thud. My arms started to ache, the muscles burning. Sweat dripped into my eyes. I was working blind, fueled by nothing but my father's last words and a growing sense of urgency. After 10 minutes of relentless pounding, I felt a change. A crack. I dropped the hammer and felt the surface with my fingers. A spiderweb of fractures had spread from the center. I crawled out, grabbed the crowbar, and pushed it back underneath. I found the largest crack and jammed the tip of the crowbar into it. I put all my weight on the bar. There was a loud grating sound, and a chunk of concrete shifted. My heart leaped. I worked the bar back and forth, leveraging, prying, ignoring the scrapes on my knuckles and the fire in my shoulders. The concrete broke apart in chunks. Finally, the crowbar hit something that wasn't concrete. It made a hollow, metallic sound. I dropped the bar and cleared away the last of the rubble with my bare hands. My fingers brushed against a cold, flat metal surface. I felt around its edges. It was another case, much larger and flatter than the one in the office. I found the handles on the side and pulled. It was heavy, but it slid out from the hole with a gritty screech. I dragged it out from under the planer and into the open. I was exhausted, filthy, and my hands were raw, but I was buzzing with adrenaline. I felt for latches. There were 4 of them, 1 on each side. I flipped them open. I put my fingers under the lid and lifted. It opened with a soft, hydraulic hiss. I couldn't see what was inside. I had to feel it. My hands brushed against stacks of what felt like paper, and something else, something solid and bound. And underneath it all, more paper. I pulled out one of the stacks. Even in the dark, I knew what it was. The crisp, unmistakable feel of cash. Stack after stack of it. My father's voice echoed in my head. Your fresh start. But then my fingers found the other object. It was a thick, leather-bound book. A ledger. And beside it, a thick portfolio of documents held together with a binder clip. Your weapon. The choice was here, in this box, in the dark. And I had a terrible feeling I was going to need the weapon far more than the fresh start. Just then, a faint vibration came from my backpack. My phone, plugged into a portable battery I'd forgotten I had, was coming back to life. As the screen lit up, it illuminated my face and the contents of the box. And at that exact moment, it began to ring. The cheerful, generic ringtone sounding like a scream in the dead silence of the mill. I looked at the screen. The caller ID read, Davies, William. The lawyer. My blood ran cold. A call at this hour could only mean one thing. Trouble. The phone's ringtone seemed to drill into the silence of the mill. For a second, I just stared at the screen, at Mr. Davies' name glowing in the dark. My mind was racing. The snooping SUVs Frank had mentioned. My dad's warning. Brenda. This couldn't be a coincidence. My hand, trembling and covered in concrete dust, reached out and swiped to answer. Leo, thank God. Mr. Davies' voice was tense, stripped of its usual soft, rounded quality. Are you at the mill? Yes, I said, my own voice a hoarse croak. What's wrong? I just got an alert from my office's legal docket service. It's an emergency motion, filed after hours. Northridge Holdings has petitioned the county to seize the Northwood Mill property. The words hit me like a physical blow, winding me. Seize it? How? Why? For the back taxes, he said, his voice grim. They've offered to pay the full delinquent amount. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars in exchange for the title. It's an aggressive, predatory move, but it's not entirely illegal. They're claiming the property is abandoned, a public hazard, and that their acquisition would be in the county's best interest. The hearing is scheduled for first thing in the morning. In the morning? My head was spinning. They can't do that. It's my property. They're arguing that you have no intention or means to satisfy the debt and that you've abandoned the property. Your disappearance after your 18th birthday is being used as evidence of that abandonment, he explained, a note of fury in his voice. It's a disgusting, calculated ambush, Leo. It's clear Brenda coordinated this with her brother. She knew you had nothing. She set you up to fail, to be wiped off the board before you even knew you were playing a game. I looked from the phone to the open metal case at my feet. The stacks of cash. The ledger. The documents. The game. I was just starting to understand the rules. Leo, are you there? I'm here, I said, my voice low and steady now. The panic was being burned away by a cold, hard anger. What can we do? Honestly, not much, Mr. Davies admitted. and I could hear the defeat in his tone. To stop the seizure, we'd have to pay the back taxes in full, immediately. And we'd have to present a credible plan for the property's future to prove it's not abandoned. We have neither the funds nor the time. The hearing is in less than 12 hours. I can try to file for a continuance, but given the political pressure a company like Northridge can exert in a small county, he trailed off. The meaning was clear. We were going to lose. I looked down at the box again. My father's words. Your weapon or your fresh start. The cash was the fresh start. I could take it, disappear tonight, and live a comfortable life somewhere far away. Let them have the mill. Let Brenda win. It was the safe choice, the logical choice. But then I looked at the ledger. I picked it up. Its leather cover was worn and smooth. I opened it. Even in the dim light of my phone, I could see my father's neat, precise columns of figures. Dates, names, amounts. It wasn't a business ledger. It looked more like a diary of crimes. Then I picked up the portfolio of documents. On top was a set of geological surveys of the land around the mill, highlighting its proximity to the river and the porosity of the soil. Underneath were lab reports, water sample analyses. The pages were filled with terrifying chemical names and numbers flagged as being hundreds of times over the legal limit. My father hadn't just been hiding. He'd been investigating. Mr. Davies, I said slowly, an idea taking shape, a wild, desperate gamble. What if we could pay the taxes? There was a silence on the other end of the line. Leo, we just discussed this. The amount is substantial. Unless you found a pot of gold out there. Maybe I have, I said. I started counting the stacks of cash. They were bundled in $5,000 increments. My hands shook as I counted. 10, 20, 50, $100,000. More. There was over $200,000 here. A fresh start indeed. A new life, anywhere I wanted. Or a seat at the table. I have money, Mr. Davies. Enough. More than enough. What? How? He sounded completely baffled. My dad left it for me. He knew this would happen. I took a deep breath. But that's not all he left me. He left evidence. Proof, I think. I think Northridge Holdings doesn't just want the land. I think they need it. To cover something up. I quickly explained about the ledger, the water samples, the geological reports. As I spoke, the pieces clicked into place in my own mind. My father had suspected Brenda's brother was using his other, more remote properties for illegal industrial waste dumping. He'd been systematically poisoning the groundwater. But the Sawmill property, with its direct access to the river, was the key. If he owned it, he could control the runoff. He could fudge the environmental reports. He could bury his crimes forever under the guise of new development. The worthless mill wasn't worthless at all. It was the linchpin of his entire criminal enterprise. And my father had known it. He'd been building a case against him right under his nose. When I finished, there was a long, stunned silence from Mr. Davies. I could hear his soft, slow breathing. My God, he whispered, the sound full of awe. John, you magnificent bastard. He cleared his throat, his professional demeanor snapping back into place, but now it was charged with a new energy. Okay, Leo, okay. This changes everything. Don't touch that evidence. Don't move it. Stay where you are and lock the doors. The first thing we do is pay the taxes. That stops the seizure in its tracks. It takes their primary weapon away. Can you get to the county courthouse by 9 a.m.? Yes, I said. Good, I'll meet you there. I'm leaving now. It's a 3-hour drive. I'll be there. We'll walk in, pay the full amount in cash, and file a notice of intent to renovate. That will stun them. It will buy us time. And then what? I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. And then, Mr. Davies said, his voice now cold and sharp as a shard of glass. We let them know that we have the ledger. We don't show them our whole hand. We just let them know we have a hand to play. We turn their ambush back on them. Your father didn't just leave you a shield, Leo. He left you a sword. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, the phone's light illuminating the incredible, terrifying contents of the box. My father had entrusted me with a choice that was far bigger than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about justice. It was about my father's legacy. It was about deciding what kind of man I was going to be. The boy who ran, or the man who fought. I closed the lid of the heavy metal case, the sound sealing my decision. I wasn't going anywhere. This was my ground, and I was going to defend it. The hours before dawn were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in the dusty foreman's office, the metal case at my feet, and for the first time, I began to read the letters. I read them in order, just as my father had instructed. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, a window into the last years of his life. The first letter, written 3 years ago, was full of fear. He had just received his diagnosis. He wrote about his terror, not of dying, but of leaving me alone with Brenda. He described her coldness, her greed, the way she looked at our family not as a unit of love, but as a collection of assets. He had already seen how her brother operated his businesses, with a casual ruthlessness that chilled him. He knew, with a father's instinct, that I would not be safe. The second letter, written a few months later, was when the plan began to form. He wrote about the mill. He remembered its isolation, its perceived worthlessness. He described driving up to Northwood alone, walking the property for the first time in years. He saw the decay not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a camouflage. He started making calls, subtly inquiring about Northridge Holdings, planting the seeds of his investigation. The third letter was where the anger began to show. He had obtained the first water samples, paying a retired chemist friend to test them discreetly. The results were horrifying. He wrote about the river, the one he and his own father had fished in, the one that fed the whole valley. He wrote about Brenda's brother, not just as a criminal, but as a man poisoning the earth for profit. The fight had become personal. It was no longer just about protecting me. It was about protecting his home, his past. As I read, I felt my image of my father shifting. I had always seen him as a kind, gentle, somewhat sad man, defeated by the modern world, who had retreated into a quiet life. But these letters revealed a different man, a strategist, a fighter, a quiet, patient warrior who had spent his final years forging a weapon in secret. He had used his unassuming nature as a shield, letting Brenda and her family underestimate him, just as they were now underestimating me. There was one last envelope at the bottom of the stack, thicker than the others. The label on it simply said, "When it's over." I set it aside. It wasn't over yet. Dawn broke gray and cold. I packed what I needed. I took the ledger and the portfolio of evidence and put them in my backpack, zipping it tight. Then I counted out the cash for the taxes. $38,652, according to the notice Mr. Davies had read to me. I put the rest of the money back in the case, carried it to the hole under the planer, and slid it back into its concrete tomb. I replaced the broken chunks of concrete as best I could. It was the safest place for it, for now. Walking into town that morning, I felt like a different person. I was no longer a lost, homeless kid. I was a messenger, an heir. The weight of the backpack felt like armor. The cash in my jacket pocket felt like a key. I met Mr. Davies on the steps of the county courthouse. He looked exhausted, his suit rumpled from the all-night drive, but his eyes were bright with a fierce, combative light. He gave me a firm handshake. "You ready for this, Leo?" "I'm ready," I said. We walked into the courthouse. It was a small, old building that smelled of floor polish and bureaucracy. We found the county clerk's office. A stern-looking woman sat behind a high counter. "We're here to settle the outstanding tax liability on the Northwood Mill property," Mr. Davies announced, his voice booming in the quiet office. The woman looked at him over her glasses. "That property is scheduled for a seizure hearing this morning." "Not if the taxes are paid in full," Mr. Davies said smoothly. He nodded to me. My heart was pounding. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the thick bundle of cash. I placed it on the counter. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. The clerk stared at the money, her jaw slack. "I believe you'll find that amount to be correct," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. The next hour was a blur of paperwork. The clerk, flustered and suspicious, counted the money 3 times. Mr. Davies, a master of the bureaucratic dance, filed the payment, got the receipt, and immediately filed a notice of intent to renovate and secure, complete with a preliminary engineering assessment he seemed to have fabricated on the drive up. We were building a wall of paper around the mill, a fortress of legality to match its physical isolation. As we were finishing, 2 men in expensive suits walked into the office. One was older, with slick gray hair and a predatory smile. The other was younger, nervous. The older one's smile vanished when he saw us at the counter. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and arrogant. The clerk looked from him to us. "The taxes on the Miller property have just been paid, in full." The man's face went pale, then flushed a deep, ugly red. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "You're the boy? Where did you get that kind of money?" I didn't say anything, I just looked at him. This was him, Brenda's brother, the man who had poisoned a river. Mr. Davies stepped forward. "My client's finances are his own concern," he said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a mill to secure." He put a hand on my shoulder and guided me out of the office, leaving the developer sputtering in our wake. Outside in the hallway, Mr. Davies let out a long breath. "That was step 1, he said, a grim smile on his face. "Now for step 2. He pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make a phone call to this gentleman's lawyer. I'm not going to threaten him. I'm simply going to inform him that my client has come into possession of his late father's business records. Records he might find illuminating." I looked back at the door to the clerk's office. I had just walked into a war. My father had given me a choice, and I had made it. I had chosen to fight. I looked at Mr. Davies, who was already talking quietly and firmly into his phone. I had an ally. And I had a fortress. But most importantly, I had my father's last letter, the one labeled, "When it's over." I had a feeling I would be reading it soon. I finally understood what he meant. The inheritance wasn't the mill or the money or even the evidence. The inheritance was the choice itself. The chance to stand for something. The chance to finish the fight he had started. The aftermath was not a dramatic courtroom explosion, but a quiet, suffocating implosion. Mr. Davies' phone call worked like a key in a lock. The pressure we applied was precise and devastating. We didn't leak the evidence to the press. We didn't go to the district attorney. We simply let Brenda's brother know that we had the power to destroy him and that we would use it if he didn't back away. 2 days after the confrontation at the courthouse, a new offer arrived at Mr. Davies' office. It wasn't from Northridge Holdings. It was from a shell corporation with a different name, offering to buy the sawmill for a price that was 10 times the original offer. It was a bribe, plain and simple. A desperate attempt to buy the evidence and bury it forever. Mr. Davies and I discussed it. It was tempting. It was enough money to vanish and live well for the rest of my life. But it felt wrong. It felt like taking blood money. We refused. A day later, the real surrender came. It was a legal agreement, drafted by a team of high-priced lawyers. In exchange for the complete destruction of the ledger and all related documents, Northridge Holdings would not only withdraw all interest in the Sawmill property forever, but they would also fund an anonymous trust dedicated to the environmental cleanup of the Northwood River Basin. A very, very well-funded trust. Furthermore, Brenda would sign over the house, my father's house, to a charity of my choice. She would walk away with the liquid assets she had already secured, but the home my father had built would not be hers to profit from. It wasn't perfect justice. Brenda's brother would not go to prison. He would continue to be a rich and powerful man. But his plan to poison the valley was stopped. The river would be cleaned. Brenda would be cast out of my father's house. It was a compromise, but it was a victory. A victory my father had engineered from beyond the grave. We signed the agreement. The next day, in Mr. Davies' office, we watched as the ledger and the portfolio of documents were fed into an industrial shredder. The war was over. I didn't move back into the house. I had it donated to a local organization that provided housing for young adults aging out of the foster care system. It felt right. It felt like something my dad would have done. I went back to Northwood. I took the bus again, but this time it felt different. I wasn't running away from something. I was returning to something. I was going home. When I arrived at the mill, it looked the same, old, tired, and broken. But I saw it differently now. I saw the strength in its massive beams, the history in its weathered siding, the stubborn resilience in its iron heart. It hadn't just been my father's fortress, it had been his partner. I went up to the foreman's office, which I had cleaned in the days I'd spent waiting for the legal battle to play out. The dust was gone, and light now streamed in through the clean window. I sat down at the desk and pulled out the last letter, the one that said, "When it's over." My hands were steady as I opened it. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you won. I knew you would. I knew you had the strength. I am so proud of the man you have become. I'm sorry I had to put you through all this. I'm sorry I had to leave you a war instead of a fortune. But our legacy, the Miller legacy, was never about money. It was about building things. It was about taking something raw and making it useful, making it strong. Your grandfather built this mill from nothing. I tried to carry it on. And now, you have saved it." He went on to tell me about the money I'd found. He had been saving it for years, skimming it from his own salary, living frugally. It was never for him. It was always for me. It was the fresh start, if I had needed it. But he hoped I wouldn't. "The mill is yours now, Leo," the letter continued. "Truly yours, free and clear. I know it's a wreck, but it's a good wreck. It has good bones. You don't have to be a lumberman. You don't have to follow in my footsteps. But I hope you don't walk away from it. A home isn't just a place you sleep. It's a place you build. A place you fight for. A place that holds your history and your future all at once. What you do with it is up to you. Sell it, fix it, let it stand as a monument to stubbornness. The choice is yours. That was the real inheritance I wanted to give you. Not a property, but a choice. The freedom to build your own life, on your own terms, on solid ground." He ended the letter with a simple line. "I love you. Go build something wonderful, Dad." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I looked out the window at the silent, sprawling mill. Build something wonderful. The words echoed in the quiet room. I didn't know the first thing about construction, or business, or running a mill. But I knew how to break concrete. I knew how to fight. I could learn the rest. I walked out of the office and down into the main hall. I stood in the center of the vast space, looking up at the soaring ceiling. A single beam of sunlight cut through a grimy window high above, illuminating the swirling dust, just as it had on my first night here. But the dust didn't look like a shroud anymore. It looked like potential, like seeds waiting to be planted. I spent the next week just walking the property. I made lists, I took measurements, I started to dream. I wasn't going to rebuild a sawmill. The world didn't need another one. But this place, this building, it could be something else. The soaring ceilings, the massive beams, the waterfront location. It could be workshops for artisans, a brewery, a community market, a place where people came together to build things again. I went back to see Frank at the hardware store. I didn't buy a sledgehammer this time. I bought a generator, heavy-duty extension cords, and a set of work lights. He gave me the number of a retired contractor, a man named Gus, who had worked for my father 30 years ago. That evening, I fired up the generator. It sputtered to life with a roar, and for the first time in over a decade, light filled the Northwood Mill. I strung up the work lights, and the cavernous space was suddenly illuminated, its shadows chased into the corners. It looked even bigger, even more full of possibility. Gus came by the next day. He was an old man with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes that had seen everything. He walked through the mill, his hand trailing along the machinery, a strange, sad smile on his face. "I remember when your dad and I installed this planer," he said, patting its iron flank. "Thought we were kings of the world." He looked at me. "What are you planning to do with this place, son?" "I want to bring it back to life," I said. "Not as a mill, as something else. Something for the town." He was quiet for a long time. He looked around, up at the beams, out at the river. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Your dad would have liked that," he said. "It's a fool's errand, you know. It'll take every penny you have and 10 years off your life." "I know," I said. He grinned, a wide, wonderful, gap-toothed grin. "Good. Fool's errands are the only ones worth doing. When do we start?" And that's how it began. The slow, arduous, joyful work of reclamation. We started with the roof, patching the holes that let the rain in. We cleared out the smaller, broken pieces of equipment, making space, letting the building breathe. Word got around town. People started stopping by. Some came to share stories about my dad. Some came just to watch. A few, like Gus, came to help. They'd bring coffee, or a pair of work gloves, or just an hour of their time. I learned to measure, to cut, to weld. I learned the language of wood and steel. I was building something, and in the process, I was rebuilding myself. I wasn't the scared kid on the porch anymore. I wasn't the ghost haunting the bus station. I was Leo Miller. I was a builder. This place, this pile of rust and memories, had saved me. It had given me a past I could be proud of and a future I could build with my own 2 hands. It was the greatest inheritance a son could ever ask for. So, here's my question for you. What does the word inheritance really mean? For me, it had nothing to do with money or property. It was a lesson. It was a choice. It was a second chance I never knew I needed. My father left me a ruin, but what he really gave me was a foundation. And I think we all have foundations like that in our lives. The people, the places, the memories that make us who we are. Sometimes they're buried under a lot of pain and concrete, but they're there. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about your own foundations, please consider subscribing to the channel. And I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Share a story, an insight, or just say hello. This is a community for people who build, who fight, who turn ruins into homes. You're not alone, and your story matters. Thanks for being here.